you get to click to stay. And now I've got the pleasure of introducing Dawn Friedman. So about Dawn. Dawn is a therapist in private practice, an adoptive parent in an open adoption, and a member of an extended birth family and reunion. Dawn's writing on adoption has appeared in numerous different publications, including Adoptive Families Magazine, Salon.com, Brainchild Magazine, Huffington Post. She has presented on adoption for Psych Central's Inside Mental Health podcast, as well as Dawn Davenport's Creating a Family, and was a consultant on This American Life on an episode about open adoption. You can learn more about Dawn at her website, which is www.dawnfriedman.com, and I will be putting that in the chat as well. So welcome, Dawn.
Hi, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day, or as I call it, the day before chocolate is on clearance. So the thing I miss most about presenting pre-COVID is I really love the interaction and connection with all of you. And it is fine with me. And I'm so happy to see you, Cynthia. It's so great to see you. It's great to see. I see a number of friends here and I really appreciate you showing up. It's fine with me if you have your camera off. I know that we're all zoomed out and it does not hurt my feelings at all. I'm always happy to see your lovely faces, but I want you to do what's comfortable for you. And I do really encourage you to go ahead and use that chat. Go ahead and message Betsy if you want her to ask your question or share your comment privately. I'm not going to be watching it because I'm so scatterbrained that just doing this is taking all of my focus. But I really appreciate your feedback. I know that you have expertise on this topic. I would like to learn from you as well. I certainly don't think I'm the only person here who knows about this. I'm just the person who's been assigned to talk about it. I wanted to say too that I have been so lucky to have Adoption Network Cleveland in my life. I got started there in one of the all adoption meetings when Ohio Birth Parent Group was doing their meetings. And Kate Livingston and I started talking about having an all adoption meeting. And Adoption Network Cleveland was so lovely to say, we're going to help you do that. I have learned so much from my peers and my companions in adoption, and they've made such a difference in my life and such a difference in my daughter's life. She's now 17, and Marnie has been kind enough to allow her to come to some meetings, even though she's underage, and they have been so wonderful for her. So I am going to assume that you have all taken advantage of the fact that the meetings are online and you can get to them now, even if you're not in Ohio. But if you haven't, I really encourage you to do that. There's such wonderful places to learn and meet the people who can hold your hand along the way. So again, I want you to chime in if you have any thoughts or feedback or things you want to share about this. But when Betsy approached me to ask me if I wanted to talk about ambiguous loss and disenfranchised grief, I jumped at it in part because it's coming up a lot in my therapy sessions, not just with people who have a connection to adoption, but in the context of the COVID pandemic. And because I know that grief can remind us of grief, that even if the things don't seem connected, they can sometimes remind us of other losses. I think this has been such a heavy time. So as we're talking about this, other things may come up to you besides adoption, and allow that to happen for you. Adoption is not a segregated event in our lives. It is part of who we are. It permeates our experience. And so it impacts other things that happen for us too. So if you have something to share, again, maybe it's about the pandemic, maybe it's about something else, please feel welcome to do that, because we are full complex people, not just our roles in adoption. Okay, clear? All right, everybody. Okay. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the ghost kingdom. And if you know how to do the reactions, can you do a thumbs up if you've heard of the ghost kingdom? That's Betty Jean Lifton's theory. Okay, some people are, this is awesome. Okay, I'm going to tell you about it anyway, just in case you haven't heard of it, because not everybody's got a thumb up, but some people do. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you about it. And the ghost kingdom was based on a theory that Selma Freyberg, she was a child therapist, she was a psychoanalysis Freudian, and she came up with this concept called ghosts in the nursery. And what that was is that when we become parents, we carry the ghosts of our own childhood experience into our relationship with our children. That's not all that shocking. Of course we do. But she called that ghosts in the nursery and said that parents are sort of haunted by this experience and that we need to investigate and engage with it in order to grow. That through parenting, we also heal our childhood selves. Betty Jean Lifton, who was a therapist and an adoptee and an adoption activist, took this a step further and talked about the ghost kingdom. And Betsy has the article that talks about this. And I think she said she was going to send it out in an email. She's not. Yep. She said yes. Okay. And but I'm going to go through really quickly what Betty Jean Lifton has to say. Now, she has a lot of stuff to say, and a lot of it is very sort of heady and theoretical, and we're just going to be a little more nitty gritty about it. And what she says is that in adoption, we are haunted not just by the ghost of the child we were and the parenting that we had, but that we are haunted by the what might have been. So specifically, she says, the adoptee is haunted by a ghost mother and father, the birth parents who were unable to care for them. And we see this play out in cultural ideas about adoption, where you have a movie where maybe the adoptee thinks that their birth parent might have been somebody famous or something. That's sort of a classical idea of it. But there is the birth mother and birth father, and they're sort of haunted by that. But further, and this is where I think it's very interesting, also by the person they might have been, the baby they would have been had they been cared for by those people. Also, the baby who their adoptive parents maybe would have had. And she calls this a golden child, his sibling rival. And so there's that haunting too, the haunting of myself, who I might have been, the haunting of who I was sent here perhaps to replace, maybe this magical baby I was meant to replace. And of course, then also the birth parents and that whole adoption constellation of family members. Now, for the birth parent, they also are thinking of the ghost of the child that they lost, the child that was lost to adoption. And we definitely, I think that is, that's one that we all kind of instinctively know, that the empty arms of the birth parent, that the child that parent is missing. But Betty Jean Lifton says also there is the relationship between the birth parents. If they are not together any longer, there's the what might have been of that perhaps, or who they were to each other at that time for good or for bad. And then movingly, the ghost of the mother she might have been had she kept that child, not only in relationship to that child, but how that would have impacted her relationship to future children she's already parenting. And so she is haunted by this cast of characters as well. And of course, the ghost of the adoptive parents, whether or not there is an open adoption. I know that in our open adoption, we had to struggle with sort of my daughter's birth mother for some time had me on a pedestal, which I had to fall off spectacularly in order to continue our relationship and become a person for her. So, and I was also haunted by this perfect mother I felt like I needed to be for her. For the adoptive parents, there is the bio child, perhaps they might not have been able to have, that maybe they lost through death or stillbirth or miscarriage. And even if they did not come to adoption through infertility, there is still the baby they might have had in this particular circumstances. They too might also be haunted by the bio parents and of the vision of the kind of parents they might have been. In my practice, when I am working with adoptive parents and they are struggling to connect with their birth child, we often need to confront the baby they thought they were going to have, not necessarily the one they were going to give birth to, but the imaginary baby they thought they were going to adopt, what they imagined parenthood would be like, and the parent that they thought they were going to be. I think any parent needs to confront that, whether they are adoptive parent or birth parent, however, but I think like in all things, adoption makes things writ large. And so the usual struggles that we might have are exacerbated by the struggles of adoption. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Okay. In open adoption and reunion, we're also, those ghosts are running alongside the real people. Like I said, that my daughter's mom thought that I was going to be this perfect mother, and I am not. And of course, that was a big struggle for my daughter and her birth mother. As my daughter has gotten older and they have gotten more access to each other, they've had to renegotiate that relationship over and over again developmentally. And as Penny, my daughter's birth mother, has gone on to have other children and parent, again, they've had to come back and renegotiate. And I would argue that oftentimes what they're renegotiating is this idea of who they are, who they thought they would be, who they wished they were, how they wish things would be. And that's all of the ghost kingdom. I think a good way to think about this is like the Marvel metaverse. I don't know if any of you are watching any of those Marvel movies, but there's always these things coming alongside of what could have been and what might have been. Betty Jean Lifton calls this an alternate reality, the land of what might have been. So the people that we actually miss, the lost parents, the lost children, they live there, but so do the people we might have been. The parents we might have been to the children we did not have, the child we might have been to the parents we did not have. This is heavy lifting. This is such big work. And we don't get to talk about it very much, but I'm not going to get to that yet. The next thing I'm going to get to, because Betty Jean talks about this, and she quotes D.W. Winnicott, who's the guy who said, "You only need to be a good enough mother." If you heard of that, can you thumbs up if you've heard that line? You only need to be a good enough mother. You guys haven't heard that? I love this guy because he says you only need to be a good enough mother. Isn't that so terrific? And his argument is actually that perfect parents, thank you, Anne, perfect parents aren't good for kids, not just because it's unrealistic, because who's perfect, but because we do need to be imperfect so that we can model for our children that we're imperfect. And so we do not expect them to be perfect. And we're all struggling humans, messy, and all of that. But he also said something different. He said, and he famously said, "Show me a baby and I'll show you a baby and someone else," meaning a baby does not exist without a caregiver. Like the baby and the caregiver are so symbiotic that they are almost one and the same early on. And Betty Jean Lifton says, "I believe there is no such thing as an adopted baby, only the ghost mother, the baby, and the adoptive mother triad." And I think that is really compelling. I think that is really true. She says that in reunion, and I think this is less present in open adoption when it's open at birth, or not less present. I would say it is more out in the open because it's open adoption. That reunion requires adoptees to enter the ghost kingdom. And again, and yeah, see, I was wrong. I do think openness does require you enter the ghost kingdom. It just makes it more clear more quickly. You're confronting it much more quickly, which is we have to come to terms with our ghosts. That's part of the work that we do together, which leads us to disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss. So I'm okay. I was just checking the chat really quick. Thank you, Jeanette, for commenting. So let's talk about disenfranchised grief. This is grief that is unacknowledged, and it is grief that is denied. So not only is it unacknowledged, sometimes people will just deny that you're allowed to have it. It was a term coined by Kenneth, I think you pronounce it Doka, it's D-O-K-A, who was a professor of gerontology. And he came up with, these are the kinds of, this is what makes disenfranchised grief disenfranchised. And as members of the adoption constellation, I invite you to consider whether or not this is present in the adoption constellation. 1, society says the lost relationship isn't important. Oh yeah, they say that all the time, right? They say, how can you miss your mom? What about your adoptive mom? I have heard tell of therapists, people who should know better, people who should know better, who have said to adoptees who are coming to them to contemplating the reunion, but what will your adoptive mother think of that? What if it hurts her feelings, right? That's disenfranchised grief. The mechanism of loss is stigmatized. So adoption itself, whether it is making an adoption plan or being adopted, is stigmatized. Back to those Marvel movies, one of the big jokes is somebody says to Thor, oh my God, so Loki's your brother? And Loki goes, adopted. So yes, the mechanisms of loss are stigmatized. The relationship is stigmatized when the person who is grieving is not recognized as a griever. Yes, for sure. And sometimes this is, late discovery adoptees who show up at their parents' funeral and somebody goes, I don't know why you were here. He wasn't your real dad anyway, right? And sometimes it's more subtle than that, where there's just a difference in how people expect you to have this particular experience. You're not recognized as a griever, not recognized as having a right to grieve. That the loss is not recognized as worthy of grief. So a lot of people tell birth parents, well, you made the decision. What right do you have to grieve? Why are you complaining now? That's not right. Adoptive parents are told, you have a baby. What do you mean you're still grieving your infertility? And newsflash, babies do not cure infertility. People think they do. They don't. It's totally separate thing. Resolving your infertility rarely happens just because you get a baby in your life. And then finally, the way of grieving is stigmatized. You're not getting over it in the right way. You're not handling it the way people want you to handle it. So what do you guys think? Disenfranchised grief, is this a thing in adoption? Hell yes, this is a thing in adoption. Absolutely. Oh, I love this, Marnie. Always so bright. I heard disenfranchised loss described as a loss where nobody brings you a casserole. I love that. I will steal that. Marnie, if you know where you heard it, let me know, because that's really good. Absolutely. Anybody get any casseroles through your adoption experience? We deserve so many casseroles. My gosh. I'm going to add here too, and they don't mention this in any of the stuff I read, but in adoption, grieving can feel dangerous. It has to go underground. A birth parent in an open adoption may feel very I got muted. Did I get muted on purpose? Because I'll mute myself again if I got muted. I didn't.
No, I don't know what happened.
Some craziness. Probably that ANC staff messing with
Yeah,
things.
it was an accident. Sorry.
So anybody, I think we all got unmuted, so we shall mute ourselves except Dawn.
Okay, so
Trying to keep it light,
yeah, we're all friends here. It's all fine, right? So again, a birth mother in an open adoption may not feel safe to share her grief with the adoptive family for fear that this will jeopardize her relationship with that family, right? Absolutely. And certainly adoptees do not feel safe to share grieving the loss of parents, because you've even got your therapist telling you you need to worry about your adoptive parents' feelings. So that grief goes underground. And again, I will share that adoptive parents who are still grieving a specific experience of parenthood, there's not really a safe place to talk about that. And they need to talk about that grief and process it too, in order to come to adoption fully, as Lori says, open-hearted and ready to accept the reality of our children have other parents and they can live that paradox. I was just checking the chat again. And again, back to the Betty Jean Lifton and the Ghost Kingdom, there is also the grief of who we thought we were or who we thought we might be. We may not feel safe to face that. All the great complications of adoption. Again, I think adoption just sort of showcases all the things that are actually true about families and makes us realize we can't just keep lying about it, like that we own our children and that blood is more important, that law is more important, just all of that stuff that adoption sort of makes real. Somebody is sharing there's a book called Disenfranchised Grief. It has a chapter for grief for birth mothers but nothing really acknowledging the grief and trauma adoptees go through. Boy, that is interesting that it talks about birth parents, but not adoptees. That's interesting because usually, boy, can't everybody be sad? Why does it have to be? We're just going to talk about some of it. Oh, that's frustrating. Okay, so that's disenfranchised grief, and we're all on the same page. We all agree. Disenfranchised grief. Yes, I am experiencing that. People are not honoring my grief. We're going to move to ambiguous loss, and then we're also going to talk about how we manage that grief. So don't worry, we're not just going to leave you hanging about this. So ambiguous loss is a term coined by Pauline Boss, and that's actually her website is ambiguousloss.com. And she's got some webinars and things. I think they're mostly for pay, and she has some trainings, and she's got a book, and it's all great stuff. And basically, ambiguous loss is loss that is unclear or uncertain. So I tend to get these mixed up because honestly, I think that there's so much overlap. The difference is disenfranchisement is about nobody is validating it for you. Ambiguous loss is more about it's murky what you're losing. And she says there are two kinds, but what they have in common is that there's some kind of incongruency between absence and presence, okay? So in the first kind, she says the person is not present, but present. The person is gone, but still theoretically exists. In adoption, these are the people that we have lost through adoption. They're gone, but theoretically, they're still out there. I may not know who my birth parents were, but theoretically, they are still there. I still have family. I don't know where they are. The pain is exacerbated by this not knowing and the open-endedness. When we talk about grief, we're always talking about closure. There is not always closure in adoption. Even when we find the people that we're missing, there's not always closure. It's kind of a moving target. And there's not always closure in part because we realize, oh my gosh, you're in my life and I still need to mourn the losses of the ghost kingdom. The mother I thought you would be to me, the relationship I hoped we would have. The rise in open adoption too might make this feel more present. I remember at the all adoption meeting that sometime there would be tension between adoptees who are in open adoption and adoptees who are in closed adoptions, and struggling with those feelings of nobody's getting their pain validated. And so sometimes there became a thing that we would kind of call like a pain Olympics. And my daughter has talked about this. She's adopted open adoption domestically, that sometimes when she has friends who are internationally adopted and they say to her, you don't have it as bad as I do because I'll never find my mother. And, I always tell her, you can all have it bad, right? Like we can all be suffering. We don't have to have a fight for who has the greatest suffering. But again, other people's situations may deepen this feeling of what we have lost in this ambiguous loss. The second kind, and remember she said, wait, I'm going to scroll up in my notes, not present, but present. And then the next one is present, but not present. And this is grieving someone who is still there, but is no longer there. Usually when we're using it, we're talking about dementia, Alzheimer's, a traumatic brain injury, mental illness, alcohol or drug addiction. So a person who is still part of our lives, their body is there, but for whatever reason, they cannot be present with us. They can't be present with us, mind, heart, and soul. It's just their body. She doesn't mention this in the context of adoption. I think when we think about the ghost kingdom, it makes sense because again, it's a kind of grief that we see in reunion. We see in real relationships. We see sometimes what happens is we reunite with our birth family and we find out our adoptive family is actually not as supportive as they said they would be. Like they make us choose. So people who can be there, but they can't be there in the way that we expected. And we're grieving the ghost that we thought we were going to meet, and instead here's a real person. I think about too that this is also something that can happen, like if you break up with somebody, but you still have to work with them or you're still friends with them or something, you still have a relationship with them, but it's not the relationship you had. That's a kind of ambiguous loss. And so I think about that in the context of reunion and openness too. But also There's the classic kind of ambiguous loss that can happen, which is you go and you reunite with that person, and then you lose them because they have a traumatic brain injury, or they have drug and alcohol addiction or mental health issues. And so there is another loss on top of loss. Again, I think adoption makes things that are true even more true. So what are the symptoms of grief? And this is listed under disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people are having these feelings of grief during COVID, during the pandemic, the proms that kids didn't get to go to, the funerals we missed, the vacations we had to cancel, the coffee with friends that we never got. And so now we're not friends anymore. Again, adoption, grief begets grief. So the losses that we might have felt in COVID, we might feel more deeply because of the losses we feel in adoption, or conversely, the losses we feel in adoption seem to be coming up for us more as we confront the losses in COVID. I don't think we need to know exactly what our grief is to be allowed to grieve it. But grief can feel physical with headaches, dizziness, insomnia. It can feel like anxiety. It can feel like irritability. It can feel like just general sadness. You can have trouble thinking. A lot of people during COVID were losing words and things. As you can see, I'm doing a little bit right now. That can be a sign of grief and stress. We might feel more lonely. The relationships that we have just don't fulfill us in the same way because we're missing the relationships that we don't have or that we're grieving. We may struggle to make decisions. Little decisions can be difficult. We might find ourselves in front of the toothpaste aisle, like, do I buy Crest or Aim, which is on sale? Do I have a coupon? Those things feel overwhelming. We may cry at the drop of a hat. We may snap at people for no reason. We may get caught up in fantasies about things or a lot of escapism. I've got a lot of clients who fall asleep to The Office because it is just the most soothing, I guess, TV show. I think because everybody's seen it a million times, they find it really soothing. That might be the kind of thing that we do. So how do we get better from this? Well, first of all, get better. That's not our goal, you guys. That's just like some lie Hallmark told you. What we're going to have to learn how to do is to cope and be fully human in spite of our losses and our sorrows. When we're talking about grief in the DSM, when we're talking about grief as a diagnosis, our goal is resolution and closure, which, like I said, that doesn't really come from the losses of adoption. There really isn't closure because, again, even in reunion and openness and all of that and all these things that are meant to heal adoption, they can make things better. They can move us along, but there is essential loss at the core of adoption. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, and there's not a way to heal that. The goal is to live alongside it, to integrate it, to allow it to be part of our experience, to help us understand ourselves better and take good care of ourselves. So how do we do that? With ambiguous loss, part of the resolution, but part of our goal is to learn how to hold two opposing ideas in our mind at the same time, which is, I can love this person in front of me and I can miss the person I miss. I can love my life and I can also grieve what I lost. You can do all of those things. It's the great paradox of adoption for many people is it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and. And there are concrete ways to do this. And this is based on Pauline Boss. This is what she says. She's the ambiguous loss lady. You're welcome, Darren. So the first thing is to find meaning. And we do that by coming to talks like this. Look at you. You're all awesome. We also do that by finding support groups with people who will help us find meaning, who will validate our experience and value us and believe us about our grief, who can help us come up with rituals for things that we might do to honor that experience. We can do things by understanding, she calls it adjusting mastery. And a big part of that in adoption is understanding the loss is not your fault. Even for those birth parents who wholeheartedly made an adoption plan, I know that they might not have done that had the situation been different, right? Because I always say in a perfect world, there'd be no adoption. Everybody would be able to just custom order exactly the family they need when exactly they need it, exactly the family meant to serve them. And we don't get to do that. We're all doing the best that we can. And so part of it is recognizing that the loss is not our fault, recognizing the systemic issues, things like closed records, unenforceable open adoption, the cultural limits that don't allow people to say, I have two moms without going into a bunch of explaining about it. We can only control what we can control. Again, a great place to talk about this, share our frustrations is where? At a meeting, at one of the Adoption Network meetings. And I do encourage you all to be looking in the chat. I told Betsy I wasn't going to look at it, and I keep looking at it. I can't help it. It catches my eye. The other thing is reconstructing identity. So finding supportive peers and the family members who give space, what can be a paradox of your identity, who is open to the complicated roles of adoption. I think about this too. So I said that I'm a member of a birth family. My aunt was a birth mother in the baby scoop era, and she placed her oldest daughter for adoption. The reunion has been difficult and complex, to say the least, because my mom's family is a whole lot of complications. We all actually just found out through DNA, she could be going to the DNA meeting because her dad, it turns out, was not her bio dad, and everybody's dead, so nobody knows what it means. It's all very messy. So anyway, my cousin came into reunion into this mess, and it has not gone really well. But she and I have been able to connect. She and I have been able to talk about and validate her experiences, and I can help explain to her why the not so great reunion has got nothing to do with her and everything to do with the history of trauma in my mother's family. So she can reconstruct her identity. She no longer has a fantasy that that her birth family would have been so much better than her adoptive family, because frankly, it wasn't. And two, that there is something that she could have done to make for a better reunion, because she is wonderful and our family is just very messed up. The next thing we can do is normalize ambivalence. So normalizing any anger or guilt that you have. You're allowed to love more than one person. You're allowed to not love people who you're supposed to love, whether by birth or adoption. You can be grateful for your life and wish it was different. You can be not grateful for the things in your life that you were told to be grateful for. You can accept that grief may be something that you just need to learn to live alongside it with. And again, that it will come up in other times of your life. Any big event is likely to sort of stir up some of that grief, and that's okay. That is normal and healthy. It's another opportunity to consider our losses, pay attention to them, validate it, validate our experience, and go to an Adoption Network Cleveland meeting. And then finally, no, wait, there's two more. One, she says revising attachment. I'm not crazy about this one. When I look at it, it doesn't make much sense to me. It feels redundant. Probably I'm misunderstanding it. She's talking about rituals and things again, but she covers that earlier. So you can read her book if you want to see what I'm missing about that. But she says revising attachment. And finally, discovering new hope, finding a forward path. I love that in the adoption community that often this happens with people connecting to each other and helping each other. So someone who's further along in reunion, reaching out to somebody who's just working their way through reunion, people who mentor each other. The thing that I really loved about the meeting that I used to do and Marnie does, those all adoption meetings, is what an opportunity to talk to other members of the adoption constellation and get new perspective and help each other see everybody's experiences. I think that's very powerful. And I think doing those things is another way to manage and mitigate our grief. So now I want to hear from you. What comes up for you when we're talking about ambiguous loss and disenfranchised grief. What do you need or want to share about your own experience? Since that is one of the things, is to validate it and talk about it. I'm looking.
I'll give people a minute to put that in chat. And Don, I just have to really thank you. You covered so much ground. I'm going to have to go back and watch the recording to be able to absorb it all. I had the pleasure of knowing Betty Jean Lifton for many years. And so you brought back a lot of her to me as well, and really special. One of the things I was thinking early on when you were talking about the different types of ambiguous loss, in addition to all the things that you named, the child that might have been, or the parents you might have had, I thought a lot as a kid, not only about my birth parents, but about how much chance it was I landed in this family, and all the families I could have landed in, and how different my life would be, and what a fluke it was that I was here. And so I don't know if that's common or not, but that adds another angle to it as well. Not only was I grieving that one other life, but I was grieving 50 other lives that I might have had.
I had that grief for my daughter because so we adopted through an agency, and I went and to see who was still waiting to adopt, to go look at the profiles online. And I saw a family that I thought they would be so much better for my daughter than I would be. And I had to process that too, because I felt inadequate to bringing up this wonderful child who I felt like deserved so much better than me. It's fine now. We're all fine. It's all good. I got therapy. It's okay.
So a lot of people expressing in the chat a lot of gratitude and comments about things that this brought up for them. One person saying she didn't know that she held grief until she was 50. So that'll hit you between the eyes. A lot of aha moments. So thank you for the number of shout outs for our general meetings. That's a great place to go and process, both this one we have specifically coming up on this topic, but I would venture to say that every meeting is on this topic in a certain way as well. We've got some of our meeting leaders here with us. One of the things, Don, I'd be interested to know is, how much what are your thoughts about pre-verbal loss? One of the things I really had to process 35 plus years ago when I was seeking a reunion and starting to deal with this stuff as a young adult was kind of how difficult that was, because it all happened pre-verbal and then was, denied. I mean, my parents told me I was adopted, but there was no grieving expected. So it felt like that made it all the more difficult for me.
So I was just looking at, I'm blanking on her first name. It's Hoffman. Is it Alice Hoffman, who wrote a memoir about finding her birth parents? I'll look it up. Maybe it's Huffman. God dang it. If anybody knows who I'm talking about, let me know. And she's talking about that she used to cry in her mother's arm and say, I want my mother, while her adoptive mother was holding her. And I thought of that because my daughter used to do that when she was about 2. And again, we have a fully open adoption. And I thought about that in the context of this ambiguous loss, because I think as I was holding her and she was crying, I want my mother. And I would say, I'm right here. And then I would say, do you mean Penny? Do you want Penny? And she would just cry she wanted her mother. And that relationship she had with Penny is so precious and wonderful and has grown so much, but they still lost each other. That pre-birth loss, or that pre-verbal loss, they lost each other. And I think that is the ghost that haunts them both. I absolutely believe that she grieves. Now, because I could see that in her toddler self, that I believe what she was missing is she used to call Penny her real mother. That's who she was missing. And having a relationship with her that was a birth mom relationship, she was missing that essential real mother relationship. And obviously I'm not an adoptee, and I will not speak for them. I have my daughter's permission to share certain aspects of her story about this. But anytime an adoptee tells me, I think I'm having this experience, I believe them, period. And often when I say to an adoptee, I wonder if you're having this experience, if they have a reaction, then we know that they just didn't have the words for it. It was a pre-verbal loss and they didn't have permission to think of it. Sometimes when I say it, they'll get angry with me and then maybe come back later and say, I realized that really touched a nerve for me. I can see the chat is lighting up. So is there anything there to address, Betsy?
A lot of it is people sharing experiences and losses and realizations of losses. One person posted about finding a sibling who had already passed away by the time she found them. And I think that's, that goes along with not getting the casserole. Back in the early days of Adoption Network, when we were a smaller organization and it was maybe more manageable to do, every time we had a member who found a grave at the end of their search that their birth parent had already passed away, we sent them flowers because, that was something that other people weren't going to get. And I wish we still had the capacity to do that. But that's something that's so hard to grieve, and I think people don't understand. Don, one of the things that came up for me was when you were just talking about crying for their mother, your daughter, or other adoptees crying for their mother, which I've heard before. I wonder, like, one of the experiences I had in my reunion when my adoptive mother and my birth mother, and I was 26, when they met for the first time and thanked each other and cried on each other's shoulder, and I became whole in a way that I didn't even know was missing. And so I wonder if some of that maybe for some adoptees is wanting their unified mother. Like I wasn't whole until I saw them both come together. They each had a part of my life that the other one would have given anything to have, but somehow, as good as my reunion worked out, there was a piece of me that realized I would never be who I was if I was born into my adoptive family, and I would never be who I was if I was had stayed in my birth family. And so there was a piece of me that didn't belong anywhere. That image of seeing them come together, I don't know, helped to bring that together a little bit for me, at least.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. The unified mother, that's such a compelling phrase.
Yeah. Peace over here and peace over there. And
it reminds me of the experience of third culture kids, and some of you might be third culture kids too, which is, let's say you were born in the States to parents who were in the States, but you grew up a missionary in another country. And so there's that experience. And I think that really mirrors the experience of adoptees too, of that not quite having a home.
So we've got a comment about appreciating the concept of that we can be grateful for the life that we have, but also still grieve and be sad for the life that we lost. And I think that's a both and versus either or scenario. Yeah, a lot of people are sharing experiences in the chat. Here's a question. How can we best help adoptive parents come to terms with the impact of their personal loss on their parenting disappointment?
So I'm curious, Chester, in what context you're asking that, and if you have a specific role that you're asking from.
Yes. As a parent trainer, you hear over and over again, especially talking to folks who have gone through, I've done everything. I've done this and that, and they've got every single, infrastructure you can think of. But when you ask them about, well, have you done anything for yourself? The answer is always, the blank stare. What do you mean? Just the idea that they want you to fix the kid. And I was just wondering, because whenever you bring up to folks about the fact that our personal losses as adoptive parents and as people is going to affect how we parent, and folks just don't seem to want to come to grips with that.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that for many adoptive parents, it is such a scary thing to admit, because you work so hard to arrive at this place. You jump through whatever hoops, and they have told me, I'm afraid somebody will come and take my kid then, or I can't look at that dark side of myself. I'll tell you, as a therapist and parent educator, a way I back into this is I talk about temperament and goodness of fit. And temperament is a specific, it's Stella Chase's theory of personality. And Chester, if you want to get with me afterwards, I can send you the stuff that the handout I use. But basically, and then I have them sort of map out the way their temperament and the way their child's temperament is different. Now, temperament is inherited. So you can certainly adopt somebody with a similar temperament. You can certainly give birth to somebody with a different temperament, but generally it gives people permission to notice the differences in a way that is not threatening. So you can say, well, you have a child who's really like this, and you're really like this, and no wonder you're knocking heads. And it gives them permission to start saying, I thought it would be different. I thought it would be easy. And then maybe when they feel safe enough that they can say, I think maybe if I had given birth to a child, it wouldn't be this hard, or I would be a better parent had I, there needs to be a safe place to say that, so that they're able then to come to terms with, of course you wish that. You wish parenting was easier. And now back to the parent that you need to be for this child. And again, it's the both and. Like, you can mourn the losses of, I would have liked to parent a child who didn't have this particular set of challenges, this particular temperament trait, whatever it is. Once you say, you can grieve this child you meant to have, then they're able to welcome the child that is here. But they need to feel safe to do that. It is such a scary thing for them to do.
Thank you.
Thanks. We had one person that got a lot of reaction that shared that she didn't know she was human until she met her genetic relatives when she was 30. That's powerful.
Somebody asked for the temperament. I'm just looking for it really quick. So that's why it looks like I'm not reading my email or Facebook. I don't want you to think I would do that.
Also got a number of shout outs for Tracy, who's our search specialist at Adoption Network. And I know has worked with several of you. If anybody's thinking about searching or struggling with search issues, she's a fantastic resource. She also coordinates our general meetings, our discussion meetings.
Really, can we just say how lucky we are to have Adoption Network Cleveland here? I thought like every state had that. They
I
don't.
wish, right?
Well, you just need to be Adoption Network America.
Yeah, in our spare time.
Yeah, do that. Okay, I know where I could get it.
So here's a question. Could reattachment have to do with getting to know and accept the person? I'm sorry, my chat's jumping all around here. Getting to know the person as they are, not how you thought they would be.
That's an interesting term, reattachment. So I guess I'm wondering what I do think that is how we build relationships, is confronting who we thought people were. I mean, if you think about it, there's a great talk by, it's Krista Tippett on Being does it. Alain, A-L-A-I-N, here I'm putting in the chat. It's on Being, and it's Alain de Botton. I don't know if I'm spelling that right. Google will fix it for me. So if you Google it, he has a talk about this in the context of partnership, marriages, intimate relationships, of how you have to give up that person is going to complete you and be perfect. And he says you just need to settle for what you got. And it's a really funny, interesting conversation. He wrote an article called Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. I think we can read this and think about this in the context of all kinds of relationships. Of letting go our ideals, grieving our ideals, and accepting the people in front of us. Oh, yeah, perfect. Yes, thank you, Becky. That's it. Yeah, The School of Life, those books are great. I'm still looking for the temperament thing. And look at that, Angela already put it in there for you people. Seriously, this is the best thing to listen to. I teach at Ohio State and in the Human Development Family Studies, and I'm always trying to slip that into any class I teach because I think it will save a lot of partnerships. Okay, Angela's a librarian. Librarians are the best. I can't find that temperament. I'll send it to Betsy and she'll send it to you later.
Apparently Angela is a librarian, so it's good to have resourceful people around.
Yeah.
Thank you. We will be sending out a post session email tomorrow, and I'm going to try to capture as many of these resources as I can. So if you have others, actually, I'll invite you to email them to me this evening, and I'll put my email in the chat. And so we can have a nice, healthy list of different resources for people.
Are you all going to go buy chocolate tomorrow at CVS? Get there early, man. Be like 10 cents.
And we're all going to need chocolate after tonight.
We always need chocolate. Do you need an excuse? No. No CVS chocolate. Becky, why? Why would you do that? Maybe you don't like chocolate. You can get gummy worms. You can get gummies if you want. Sour Patch Kids. Some people like those. Oh, high end. They got Linder balls there. Linder balls are high end.
All right, any last questions? A lot of rich discussion in chat. Thank you, everybody, for sharing so many personal details and feelings. So this came up a couple different times of thank you for saying the closure isn't final and done, you know, and I can attest to that, you know, of all of the different times I've gone through things, and, you know, I think I've put a lot of this aside, and there it is again. You know, it's a big part of who I am, and accepting that goes a long way. Knowing
And I'll say too, as an adoptive parent, recognizing I cannot fix my daughter's losses. I'll tell you, Susan Ito, who is an adoptee who writes a lot about adoption, was such a help to me in this, because I went to an AAC conference and an American Adoption Congress, and we went and saw someone who was just really laying on all the ways adoptees are broken. And I came out of there, just, my daughter was 3 then, just like, oh my gosh, what have we done? And Susan said, how dare they? We are survivors. We are the strongest people you'll ever meet. The worst thing already happened to us. We lost our mothers and we survived it. And she said, you have got to see your daughter as a survivor. And it was such an important impact to me. To see her as a survivor meant acknowledging her losses and knowing that was part of her without thinking she was something that needed to be fixed, or that I could fix it, like I was some kind of replacement or something. And so I just wanted to share that, because thank God I got that message early, and that it could influence my parenting of Maddie.
So we started this Monday evening speaker series right when the pandemic began, you know, in part to offer people comfort, and you know, we had some sessions around dealing with anxiety and that type of thing. And it came up several different times in a few different ways about adoptees, I don't know, being kind of extra resilient, or, you know, like we've been through a lot and we're used to adversity in some ways. And, you know, the flip side of that is being really strong. And I think, you know, what you're referring to. And so a lot of people were asking questions, you know, are we, you know, kind of going with the flow here with this pandemic in a way that maybe some people aren't, because, you know, we're used to adversity in our lives. I don't know. But that was interesting that you brought up the pandemic again, too, in terms of all the ambiguous losses we faced. So it's not something that's unfamiliar territory for many of us. Some comments about birth moms being survivors too. A shout out for the book, The Girls Who Went Away. Ann Fessler was a speaker at a Monday evening speaker series last June, and the recording is on the website on the link that I put in chat. She was wonderful, so I invite you to go watch that. Good, well, we're almost at 8 o'clock, and just such powerful stuff. So thank you so much, Don. This is really, really fantastic. So let me just end by mentioning our search assistance program and our DNA search assistance that's available. I'm going to put this link in chat here so that everybody knows. So Tracy was mentioned a couple times. So this is a way to connect with Tracy and read more about that aspect of our programming on our website. We do also have a brief program evaluation. This will be in the email that you get tomorrow as well, but if you want to fill it out this evening, here is the link to that. And so we really appreciate your feedback and your thoughts. Wanted to thank Dawn for volunteering her time with us this evening. As many of you know, Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization. We serve individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care through support, education, and advocacy. And we are a membership organization. We invite you all to join to help support our work. And you can see more about our work on our website, which I've posted links to several times, adoptionnetwork.org. So we hope to see you in a couple of weeks for our next Monday evening. Thanks everybody for coming. Good night.